Chapter 1065, Cosmos Wanderer. Mobbit glanced at Leonard and said in puzzlement, "They aren't that cold and evil." He raised his glass and took a gulp. "Don't you know that the higher the sequence, the greater the inclination is towards being cold and crazy? Which major aristocratic family in the Solomon Empire doesn't have an angel? That's why they're definitely different from normal people. As for the degree of coldness and evilness, it has to do with the choice of their anchor and the traits of their beyonder pathway. I don't know what my great-grandfather's situation is. I only know that he's very kind and amiable, and the way he speaks and acts is rather casual. In addition, the rules set by His Majesty have a key point disharmony. If all the aristocratic families have the same style, he definitely wouldn't be satisfied. The first reason given was something I expected, but the second reason is a little unexpected, but it's quite funny. Was the Black Emperor of the Solomon Empire trying to get himself diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder? Disharmony is actually a requirement. Without wearing too thick a mask, the corners of Klein's lips curled up slightly. At this moment, Audrey turned her head to look at him and asked the same question that she had as Mr. Star: Anchor. All of them knew that the aesthetic taste of the fourth epoch was disharmony and asymmetry, and had considered it common sense. So they didn't think too deeply about why there was such an aesthetic style. To the deities, believers and faith are an anchor, Klein simply explained. So that's the case. Mr. Fool also said that it's to stabilize one's condition. Audrey felt her sights broaden, allowing her to consider the relationship between the deities and believers. At the same time, she thought in puzzlement, in the early stages of Mr. Fool's reawakening, he shouldn't have many believers. Back then, what was his anchor? Leonard listened attentively as he couldn't help his expression from turning solemn. It was as though he had suddenly thought of many things. He quickly focused his attention on Mobbit. After some deliberation, he said, "What kind of an angel is Pallas Zoroast? What kind of habits does he have?" Leonard is still very cautious. He still hasn't fully believed that the grandpa in his body is Pallas Zoroast. Yes, we can't rule out the possibility that the real Pallas has fallen, and that the one still alive is an impostor. To an angel of the Marauder pathway, such an action is rather normal. And to a secret existence, replacing a particular identity is equivalent to possessing that identity, so he wouldn't deliberately expose the truth. On more important matters that he's interested in, and those that involve his safety, Leonard is more reliable than I expected. If not for that, he wouldn't have realized that I was still alive back then. As for other matters, he's just too half-hearted. He's too used to using his past experience. It's not that he isn't intelligent, but rather that he can't be bothered to use it. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Mobbit was taken aback for 2 seconds before he drank a mouthful of hard liquor and said, "Old man appears to be an ordinary elder at home. He's a bit naggy and likes to throw blows at his descendants, and enjoys life. If one didn't know it ahead of time, no one would have guessed that he is a Sequence 1 angel. His aesthetic style is different from His Majesty. He is absorbed over categories and emphasizes cleanliness and tidiness. When facing enemies, he is good at trickery and often likes to finish off his enemies by making them break down. This is quite similar to how Old Man has acted to date." Leonard nodded and asked, "Do you have his portrait?" "How could I be carrying a portrait with me? It's not like I'm looking for anyone." Mobbit shook his head in amusement. At this point, Leonard suddenly pointed to the side. "Isn't that it?" "Ah," Mobbit turned his head in confusion and doubt, only to discover that an oil painting had appeared in his right hand at some point in time. As he picked up the oil painting, the content on it gradually became clearer, revealing an old man with dark brown eyes. The man's hair was already completely white. It wasn't very sparse, and it was neatly combed to the back of his head. His forehead, the corners of his eyes, and the corners of his mouth didn't seem to have any wrinkles, not appearing too old. It was obvious that he looked quite good when he was young. He looked quite similar to Mobbit, but he exuded a rather solemn air. "I really can't tell that this is a Sequence 1 angel. Is this also because he didn't reveal his mythical creature form?" Audrey tiptoed and looked at the oil painting. After Leonard memorized the contents of the portrait, he mentioned a few relevant questions related to the Zoroast family and received a satisfactory answer. The only exception was the name of the potion names of Sequence 3 to 0. Mobbit wasn't too sure either. All he knew was that Sequence 1 was apparently Worm of Time. After ending this topic, Leonard asked about the Solomon Empire. In your era, what major aristocratic families are there in the empire? There weren't many families with dukes. Mobbit put down his cup and spread out his palm. Our Zoroast family, the Abraham family, the Zeratul family. In addition, although the Medici family and Lord Ouroboros didn't have any aristocratic titles, their standing wasn't worse than the major aristocratic families. Every time he spoke, he would curl his finger, finally curling them into a fist. Then he smiled and said, "At that time, although Tutor and the Trunsost were the most loyal angels under His Majesty, they were still ranked beneath us. They were on par with Augustus and Castia. The history of the Augustus family can actually be traced to the era of the Solomon Empire." While Audrey was surprised, she became even more focused on listening. Leonard thought and continued asking, "In that era, what was the situation in the northern continent?" All living creatures submitted to His Majesty. Even deities acknowledged His Majesty's rule in order to fight against opposing factions. Mobbit chuckled. They all have countries that belong to them in poorer places. In short, Evernight, god of combat, and death were at odds. The three deities of storm, blazing sun, and wisdom had a great conflict with each other. Earth's attitude was vague and unclear, but she was more inclined towards the god of combat. This made them unable to cooperate in a stable fashion, thus being unable to form an alliance to fight His Majesty and the true Creator. At this point, Mobbit sighed and said, "And precisely for the sake of balance, His Majesty didn't attack the southern continent and allowed death to unite the plains and the ancient forest to build the Balam Empire. No, ultimately, the six deities came to an agreement. Hence, the Black Emperor perished, establishing the Tutor Trunsost United Empire." Leonard recalled Palez Zoroast's mention of this particular phase of history, and for a baffling reason, felt how history was filled with vicissitudes. At that moment, Mobbit turned his head and looked at him. "Do you have cigarettes? These little devils that came out from the true Creator's believers aren't bad at all." Leonard immediately controlled the dream and conjured a cigarette before handing it over. "Is this an improved version?" Mobbit stretched out his right hand and snaked out a ball of fire from the kitchen behind the bar. He lit the cigarette and took a deep breath. Seeing smoke coming out of his nostrils, Leonard asked curiously, "The true Creator's believers like to smoke?" "That's right. Even Lord Medici would occasionally smoke a few sticks. Although it's just a habit for him," Mobbit answered without hiding anything. Leonard nodded and asked, "Which deity do you believe in?" "Of course, it's His Majesty. All the aristocrats in the Empire believe in His Majesty. Other than Lords Medici and Ouroboros, they believe in the true Creator. Also, Duke Bethel Abraham might just be faking it. According to what I know, he only believes in himself," Mobbit quipped. "Bethel Abraham?" A thought came to Klein. He was about to signal Leonard to ask further when he heard the poet ask, "Is Duke Bethel Abraham very powerful?" Clearly, the completely different behavior compared to the other aristocratic families in the Empire made this ancestor of the Abraham family stand out. "Very powerful. Even Lord Medici and Ouroboros are afraid of him," Mobbit said as he puffed out smoke rings. "In the Warring Era, he was publicly acknowledged as one of the angels most likely to become a deity." "Warring Era?" Leonard asked curiously. Mobbit looked at the slowly burning cigarette in his hand and said, "This isn't thrilling enough. Heh heh. The Warring Era refers to the time after the Cataclysm ended to the point when the Empire was established. It lasted about 112 years. Our Zoroast family's first angel perished in the Warring Era. Thankfully, we were helped by His Majesty before he became a god. Thus, we didn't lose the Beyonder characteristic." "Who did it?" Leonard immediately asked. Mobbit shook his head. "I'm not Sequence 4 yet, so there are many things I'm not qualified to know. Let's talk about Duke Bethel Abraham. I actually don't really know much about him, but I was very interested in their family and the Beyonder pathway they control. It's said that the apprentice can wander the cosmos once they reach Sequence 2. There are also rumors that it's at Sequence 3. "Cosmos?" Klein's pupils dilated slightly as he became more focused. At this moment, Mobbit continued, they left behind lots of information regarding the cosmos, recording many interesting things. Unfortunately, I never managed to borrow them. However, I heard of the 3 laws that they concluded for wandering the cosmos. First, don't respond to any calls. Second, don't be reckless and approach unknown creatures or buildings. Third, endure loneliness. It sounds like the cosmos is vast and dangerous. I wonder if the current Abraham family still has the travel notes related to the cosmos. I'll get Miss Magician to ask in the future. When Klein's gaze swept over, it happened to cross with Miss Justice's gaze that was directed at him. They immediately realized that the other party had also thought of Miss Magician. Leonard did the same. He nodded slightly and asked about other matters. During this process, the dream changed with Mobbit's memories. Following that, they saw the appearances of Medici, Ouroboros, and other high-level figures. Of course, as Mobbit had few interactions with the Black Emperor and Bethel Abraham and didn't dare to look at them head-on, his impression of them was a blur. Towards the end, Audrey grabbed both Klein's and Leonard's arms and jumped into Sayada's dream. This elven songster was standing in the garden holding her stomach and frowning at Mobbit. Can you steal the fetus in my stomach and stuff it into your body? It can be done, but even if it's stuffed into my body, I won't be able to give birth to him, Mobbit replied fearfully. Sayada's thought seriously and said, then steal the corresponding organs that are needed. If it's just the simple act of theft, then it might still succeed. But for what if follows after, I'll be at my wit's end. This is beyond my capabilities, Mobbit said nervously. The conversation between the human and elf left the trio dumbfounded. After a few seconds, Audrey suggested, why don't I do it this time?